Welcome, everybody. I'm Mary Ann Hakes from Explorations on Aging in College Park, and Carter Conversations is sponsored by Hyattsville Aging in Place, University Park Helping Hands, College Park Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and Explorations on Aging in College Park. Many of you are repeat visitors, and we certainly appreciate that. Well, today, in honor of Black History Month, we are delighted to present to you Dr. Dennis Doster. Um, Born and raised in Baltimore, he's an historian, a scholar, and a professor. He's the manager of the Black History Month programs through Maryland National Park and Planning. And he also teaches at the University of Maryland in the African Studies Department. And he's going to speak with us today about Prince George's Civil Rights Trail. We would appreciate your holding your questions until the end. And if you want to put them in the chat, then we will identify them when Dr. Doster is finished with his talk. I guess that's all I need to add. So, Dr. Doster, if you're ready, we'll start.
Yes, I am. So first, before I share my screen, I'll just say thank you all for inviting me to speak before you all today. And so I am a former Hyattsville resident, so I'm glad to be connected with the Hyattsville community again and be able to present with you today. And so let me share my screen. And so today I'm going to be talking about the long civil rights movement in Prince George's County. And in talking about that specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail. And I'll talk a little bit more as we move along about exactly what that is. But I like to always, when I'm doing a presentation, in Prince George's County before Prince George's County audiences, I like to talk a little bit more about my office and what we do, just because there are a lot of people that might not be aware of that we exist. And then also there are people that I know I meet that they're familiar with certain initiatives and programs, but they don't realize that that's all a part of one office. So I always have to do my due diligence to share about the M-NCPPC Black History Program. And so just a little bit more about us. So we were established in 1982. So we're a little bit over 40 years old now, and we were honored when we did turn 40 with a special award from the Maryland Historical Trust that honored our 4 decades of work. And so that was an honor for us. So 1982 is when we were established, and really we were kind of a grassroots effort that led to the establishment of this office. And really what was the case was, so in 1990 is when Prince George's County has a Black majority again. So it had not had a Black majority since 1860, when there was a Black majority in the county. And of course, that Black majority of that Black majority was enslaved. And so the numbers dip precipitously after the end of the Civil War. And also the number of the white population grows immensely. And so that African Americans are becoming the majority, down to a low of about 20% at one point. And so it's back on the uprise, like as we move into the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s. And so as more and more African Americans are moving into the county, they're looking around at the history that's being told. They're looking at the sites. So sites like Riversdale and Riverdale Park, or like Marietta and Glendale and all of our other historic sites. And they're looking at those sites and saying that the black narrative, the Black story is missing. Why aren't we talking about the African American contributions? Why weren't we talking about the enslaved? So of course now today those sites are doing much better and telling more balanced narrative, but that was not the case in 1982. And so that really led to this community push to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission to create something in Prince George's County that we now know as the M-NCPPC Black History Program. And so really focused early on with doing a lot of research And the big thing that they initially did, and it has been revisited and revised and expanded, was a survey of African American historic sites, which you can still access online in the county. And so throughout the county, talking about all of the sites from former plantations to schools to churches, etc., and highlighting the history of those sites. And so what we are is like I like to describe us as kind of a museum without walls. So we operate within facilities, historic sites. We also operate outside those walls throughout the county. And so we are a network of historic sites and museums, public programs, and other interpretive efforts that focus on Black history and culture here in Prince George's County. And so here are just a few images that represent kind of the many facets of the Black History program. And so on the top row, you'll see three of our four historic sites that we have the pleasure to oversee. So one is Abraham Hall, was built in 1889. And that was a historic benevolent lodge built in the Rossville community, which is a historic African American community located within the Merkert community, which is in present day Beltsville. And so that was a benevolent lodge built by a group called the Sons and Daughters of Abraham. And really, this group was a mutual aid society for African Americans. And so people who were members of the Sons and Daughters and paid into the dues that they collected could then access the resources that were provided to members, whether that be burial benefits and other expenses, providing other expenses for funerals, or providing funds for people who were out of work, etc. And so that was what the Sons and Daughters did, and they operated out of this building, which also became a kind of a community center that was used as a church at one point when the Queens Chapel United Methodist Church down the street burned down. Also was used as a meeting place, as I said, for the Sons and Daughters, was used as a school until a school was built in the 1920s for African American children. So many different uses. Today, it is serves as our main office. So it is an office space where we do the work that takes us throughout the county. In the center, you see on the top row center, we see Dorsey Chapel, which is a historic one-room chapel built by the African American community of Brookland, which is in Glendale, and this located on Brookland Road. And so today we use that site primarily as a rental facility. So a lot of couples get married there at Dorsey Chapel. And then on the far right of the top row, you see the image, which is also the background image that I'm using today from the Ridgely Rosenwald School, which was built in 1927 in Capitol Heights. And so that historic site was built as a two-room school and then expanded into three rooms for African Americans in that part, central part of Prince George's County. And it was built with funds from the Julius Rosenwald Fund. And so Julius Rosenwald, real quickly, was a Jewish American philanthropist who was the head of Sears and Roebuck. And he began a partnership at the kind of urging and prodding of Black leader Booker T. Washington to help support the building of schools for African American children throughout the rural South. And so he starts this fund which communities can then apply to get funding. And really what they get from him is seed money. And then they use that seed money and add to it money from their local jurisdictions, money and resources from the local Black communities. And then they are able to build these schools. And so the Ridgely Rosenwald School there in Capitol Heights is one of 10 remaining Rosenwald schools here in Prince George's County of the 20, I believe 27 that were actually built here in Prince George's County. And it is the only one that is interpreted and as a museum, as a historic site, and is restored to look like it would have originally looked when it was built. And then I'll jump down to the bottom row. And so in the bottom row in the center is our last historic site that we oversee, which is not open to the public yet, but we're excited about it because it is a site in progress. and development. And so that's the Concord Historic Site, which is a historic plantation home built in the 1790s, located in District Heights, and it sits within the Walker Mill Regional Park in District Heights. And so it's a first for us in our organization in terms of having historic site that sits within one of our regional parks, but also at this former plantation, what we're doing is telling the story. The narrative there will be through the lens of the African American experience. And so, like some of those sites I mentioned before, like Riversdale, for example, which is right down the street from Hyattsville and University Park. If you go there, you're going to learn about today a more balanced narrative. So you will learn about uh, the white enslavers as well as the enslaved there. So you will learn about enslaved like Adam Francis Plummer, but you're also going to learn about the Calverts and their role in founding the University of Maryland, et cetera. But here at the Concord site, we are solely going to be telling the story from the perspective of the enslaved. So talking about what was life like there for the enslaved and throughout the county at the network of sites related to Concord. Looking at what was life like before they were enslaved. So what kind of elements of their society and culture did they bring to from West Africa? And then also, what was it like after slavery? So the transition from slavery to freedom. And we have a pretty unique opportunity to tell that story here at Concord because the Concord mansion, which is still standing, is about, I guess, about 2 to 3 miles from the Ridgely school, which I just talked about. And so the Ridgely School is actually built on the land that was formerly a part of the plantation. And so we're able to see how on this land that was formerly uh, land that enslaved worked and labored on, that after the end of slavery, a Black community, a successful Black community, is built on and thrives on this former land of enslavement. And so those are our four historic sites that we have. And then, as I said, we do a lot of programming throughout the year. So we have an annual Black History Month exhibit. We do the annual Juneteenth Festival at Watkins Regional Park, which is now going to be in its 19th year. We do a summer internship that blends Black history and the visual arts. And we also have started in more recent years to do an annual Maryland Emancipation Day celebration in November. And so just to close out real quickly, we're talking about the M-NCPPC Black History Program is, so as I mentioned briefly, we do an annual exhibition every year for Black History Month. And so it's Black History Month, and we have an exhibition up right now called Taking Center Stage, Black Musicians in Prince George's County Music Venues from the Chitlin Circuit Era to the Present. And so this exhibit builds upon the national theme for Black History Month, which is African Americans in the arts, but it takes that national theme and focuses more in on a specific topic that we're able to highlight the history here in Prince George's County. So we move from that era of segregation and Jim Crow to the era of integration, looking at a few of the different venues where some of the biggest names in Black music were able to perform. So going all the way back to Chitlin Circuit era venues like Sis's Tavern in North Brentwood or Wilmer's Park in Brandywine, and then bringing it through to more recent decades and to the present, looking at the Cap Center in Landover and looking at the new theater at MGM National Harbor. And so that exhibit is currently on display, and it will be on display for another month. So entire month of March, it will be on display at the Harmony Hall Art Center in Fort Washington. So if you get a chance, please, I encourage you to go down there and take a friend with you. And then also every year we do an annual Black History Month poster. And that poster connects to the theme, Taking Center Stage. And it was created by our young student intern artists who work with us as a part of that Black History Visual Arts summer internship that I just mentioned previously. So young artists came and worked with us over the course of about 6 weeks during this past summer. And they worked out of actually the Pyramid Atlantic Art Center right here in well, I'm not in Hyattsville, but right there in Hyattsville. And they were able to learn about, the visual arts and different artistic processes, but also learn about history. And so we took them on field trips to see some of these places. And we also went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We had discussions, lectures. So they really were immersed in the history, and then they were able to take what they had learned to inform the creation of this poster, which is now available at any of the sites, our sites in the Department of Parks and Recreation. So you can go to your local community center or a local historic site or museum and stop by and pick a copy up while supplies last. Or you can go online to our website, pgparks.com/Black History, and there you can download a digital copy of the poster as well. So I think that's it for the M-NCPPC Black History Program, and now we'll really get into talking about the main crux of what I'm here to talk about today, and that is talking about um, the long civil rights movement in Prince George's County through talking about this Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail. And so I just wanted to give you a little kind of background on how this whole project started. And so really this was a project that started through a combination of entities coming together, which included my office, the M-NCPPC Black History Program, the Prince George's County History Consortium, the Maryland Milestones, or also known as Anacostia Trails Heritage Area, which is based right there in Hyattsville. And I feel like I'm forgetting an organization, but those were the core organizations really that came together with the idea of creating a trail. And so thinking about what does a trail look like? And so really it is intended to be a combination of an online presence, but also physical interpretive signage at sites throughout the county that tell the story of civil rights movement and civil rights activism right here in Prince George's County. And so those groups of organizations and individuals in those groups came together. A small group of us applied for funding from the National Park Service's African American Civil Rights Grant Program, and we were awarded funding. I think it was about 2018 when we first received funding. And so then we were able to take that funding and get some additional funding from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. And so combine those two pots together to create this or begin the process of creating this trail. And so we've had some bumps along the way. Of course, we got the funding, and then not too far long after that, something called COVID-19, which I know some of us were talking about at the beginning of this meeting, came along and kind of threw off the process, but we're back up and running now. We do have a website up right now, and there are about, I think, 4 signs, physical signs out at sites. And so we hope to continue to expand those. We have done a couple of teacher workshops. We're looking at hopefully doing more of those, depending on getting more funding, of course, but continuing to expand this trail. And so as we talk about the trail, well, for today's presentation, I'm going to focus on, I think, 5 sites on the trail. And actually, I'm going to focus on 5 sites of the trail where we don't have our signage up yet. But these are sites that we identified very early on as being important stories related to civil rights here in Prince George's County. And I think collectively, they allow us to think about some larger lessons that we should learn and that we should spread as we think about this idea of a long civil rights movement. And I'll talk about that maybe in conclusion at the end of the presentation. So you see right there a map of the Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis Trail. And so that trail covers part of what used to be the Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis Electric Railway. And so here you see a couple of images, one of a rail car and one of a postcard showing the 3 different areas, that the terminal areas for the electric railway, so Baltimore, Washington, and Annapolis. So the WBNA began service between Baltimore and Washington in 1908. And so this was state of the art for this time, the electric railway. So harnessing this new source of power for half hourly express service between Baltimore and Washington. It was celebrated because it had lower fares and that it had more ideal locations for the terminals in the downtown areas of these cities where it went. And so black and white passengers were able to ride the WBNA and enjoy these benefits of this new state-of-the-art electric railway. But African Americans were subject to segregation and Jim Crow, and they were sometimes relegated to inferior accommodations on the WBNA, as well as other rail service in the state of Maryland. And that was due to actual legislation being passed at the State House. So there's legislation passed in 1904 and in 1908 that codifies segregation on public transportation in the state. And so as early as 1940, we know that 1914, excuse me, as early as 1914, we know that African American lawyers were taking the WBNA to court to protest and suit and have lawsuits against them, protesting this segregation on their service. And so we have in 1919, there's a case where Warner T. McGuinn, who is a Baltimore lawyer who serves on the Baltimore City Council, he goes to court representing Carl J. Murphy, who's publisher of the Afro-American newspaper, and they mount a $5,000 lawsuit against the railroad. And then not too long after that, in 1925, we have another case where we see pictured here Charles Hamilton Houston, who represents two Washington, D.C. real estate agents in a $30,000 lawsuit against the WBNA for discrimination while traveling in Prince George's County. And so I'll stop briefly and talk a little bit more about Charles Hamilton Houston. I had a chance to give another presentation last night on housing justice and civil rights. And in that presentation, I was able to talk about Houston a little bit more. And it's always important for us to honor and inform for those who don't know about kind of the people who came before us and the people who came before the more popular figures like a Martin Luther King and kind of laid the groundwork and paved the way. So Charles Hamilton Houston, he was a native Washingtonian born in Washington, D.C. to a elite Black family, middle class family. He ends up going to Amherst College. And then after college, he serves in the Army in World War One. And that becomes a very transformative experience for Houston because he travels abroad. And for anybody that knows anything about World War One, you know about the terrible treatment that African Americans received who served as soldiers underneath U.S. Army command. And so he sees that terrible treatment. And he really comes back home with this idea of, I need to make a difference in some way through the life that I live. And so he thinks about what he can do to help fight this type of racism and discrimination. And so he decides to go to law school. So he ends up going to Harvard Law School. And then he comes out of Harvard Law School, comes back to Washington, D.C., and sets up practice. Eventually, by the late 20s and into the 30s, he becomes dean of the Howard University Law School. And that really where he has a tremendous impact because he basically mentors and educates this whole generation of African American lawyers at Harvard who are solely concentrated on civil rights litigation. And so he really lays that groundwork for these young lawyers who then go out to fight all of these important cases challenging racism and discrimination in U.S. society. And his most famous student undoubtedly was Thurgood Marshall. And so we're all familiar, hopefully, with the great work that Thurgood Marshall, but it's through Charles Hamilton Houston that we get a Thurgood Marshall. And so it's important to look at him as the person that is one of these people that's laying this foundation and laying this groundwork. And then this is just an image, as I mentioned before, of the other case of Carl Murphy, who was the editor of the Afro-American newspaper in Baltimore, who had previously been a professor at Howard University in Washington. And so he had ties in Washington and Baltimore. And so that's, why he's traveling back and forth between these two cities on the WBNA, and which leads to the segregation that he experiences, and it leads to the lawsuit. And so ultimately, with both of these suits, the cases were unsuccessful, but we see kind of these gradual steps being taken, this foundation being built for later activism and later change. And so eventually, it's not until 1951 when there is the end to segregation on public transportation within the state of Maryland. So a second stop on the Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail is the Cheltenham Reformatory. So we started kind of in the central part of the county, and now we're going down to the south. So Cheltenham School for Boys opened in January of 1873, and it was known as the House of Reformation and Instruction for Colored Children. And so this was funded initially by a Baltimore businessman by the name of Enoch Pratt. So if you're familiar with the public library system in Baltimore, it's the Enoch Pratt library system. So he was a well-known philanthropist, and he funded a number of things that initiatives and projects that were intended to help African Americans. But that may have been the goal, but that's not how Cheltenham operated. So it operated more like a prison than a school, and so conditions were very bad for the young men there. And African American organizations like the Baltimore branch of the NAACP did a lot of work to highlight the poor food situation there, the poor living conditions, the cruel treatment that the young men were experiencing. And so they were continually, basically from the beginning of their organization, which was around 1912, 1913, that was one of the areas of concern that they were working on in the teens, the 20s, and the 30s. And so, because of their work in conjunction with other Black organizations, they shed light on the horrendous conditions, and then they pushed the state to take over control of Cheltenham. And so the state takes over control in 1937. And so here's just an image of one of the buildings that used to be down at Cheltenham. And so, as I said, the state takes over in 1937. And so they continue to push for other improvements. So they push for Cheltenham to eliminate segregated accommodations for its employees and to expand the number of Black employees that are there at the site, and to put more African Americans on the board that oversees the site. And so they meet with limited success in 1948 when the governor of Maryland at the time, who was William Preston Lane, who you see pictured on the right, he appoints an all-Black board to govern Cheltenham. And then over a decade later, they experience another level of success in 61 when the Baltimore NAACP is successful in forcing the state to integrate its juvenile correctional institutions. So there's not just ones that are all Black. And so here you see some images. Like I said, on the right is an image of Governor Lane with that all Black board that was appointed. And then you'll see on the left two images of Robert McGuire. So we've heard of the noted McGuire Funeral Home, the McGuire family. So Robert McGuire, who was the patriarch of that family, and did have a home in Prince George's County at one point. And so he becomes appointed to serve on this Cheltenham board in 1951. And also going back to this other image that you see here of the board members, some of the people in the image, you have Willard Allen, who was president of the Southern Life Insurance Company, and you also have Violet Hill White, who was, I believe, the first Black woman police officer in the city of Baltimore. And then here's another important case from the 30s. So we've mentioned Charles Hamilton Houston as being the mentor to Thurgood Marshall. And so we know, in looking at Marshall's career, that he does have a number of cases in at least 2 or 3 in Prince George's County that he's involved with in the 30s and 40s as he's building up his career. And so one of those cases is this case of 4 young men at Cheltenham who are accused of a sexual assault on a white female employee at Cheltenham. And so Thurgood Marshall takes on that case. At that time, the Scottsboro boys had been in the news, so that more famous case from Alabama. And so these young men become known as the Maryland Scottsboro boys. And this is referred to as the Maryland Scottsboro case. And so he takes this case on, and he's able to get these boys acquitted of this charge of sexual assault. And so now we've gone south. Now we're going to move back up north again to talk about the Bel Air at Bowie neighborhood. And actually I had a brief video that I wanted to share, so hopefully I can stop sharing. And y'all can let me know. And so this is a snippet from a documentary. It's a few years old now. So 21? Tales of Bel Air at Bowie. And let me know if you can't hear it once I press play.
Come to arrive here in Bowie.
Basically, when I got out of the Air Force, we started looking around for places to live. We were living with Sheila's mother, and Lovett had just opened up this section of Bowie, and we came and looked, and we saw this house and bought it. So,
Yeah, there was an ad in the Washington Star. It had a picture of a Cape Cod,
yeah,
and it said "Summer at the Cape," and it had air conditioning. And we were at my mother's house in Congress Heights, in Washington D.C., sitting on her side porch. There was no air conditioning.
right.
We had dark shades and we allowed fans, but we did not have air conditioning. So "Summer at the Cape" sounded good to us. And at that point, my mother was looking in the classifieds, also saying, "Oh, here's a house. Oh, look, I just saw this. There's a house in Palmer Park." So, and we knew it was starting to move. And for $585 down and $225 in escrow, we got this small Cape Cod.
That's right.
When we came to tour the model homes, I'm doing all the talking.
Great.
We crossed the picket line because they were talking about integrating, and it was not integrated.
Levitt wouldn't sell blacks. And I was really troubled because there was a restrictive covenant on it. And of course, and I know enough about American law, the Supreme Court in the case of Shelley versus Kramer said restrictive covenants aren't enforced, but I was uncomfortable being in a house that had it. There used to be demonstrations every Saturday at the model homes. The civil rights groups would picket on Sussex Lane, now Sussex Lane. When I was chairman of the election board in 1964, in the courthouse, there were no toilets for African Americans. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, if you're African, you had to go down the street to Tolson's pool hall.
Maybe if you could describe the evolution of how you came to protest Levitt, the development at Bel Air at Bowie.
Well, I was looking for a place for my family. So that was a natural place to look because I was a GS, I don't know whether it was GS 10, 9, 10, 11 at that time. That's not a lot of money. and I couldn't afford a very expensive home. And Levitt built quality homes for a lower middle income family, and it was hard to beat their prices, but I knew my offer was not going to be accepted, so I had nothing to lose.
There's film. You're walking and protesting on the sidewalk, holding the signs.
We were very courteous to the people walking by because we didn't want to do anything that would encourage any violence. We were respectful of the customers and the staff, but we made it clear we were there for a role and we were going to fulfill that role, and nothing was going to get in our way except if the police intervened or something like that.
There's one picture that where you're in the sales office. There must have been some media there. You also see the counter picketers. Do you recall the counter demonstrators?
Yeah, there were counter demonstrators on occasion, and their signs were often very interesting, and they often showed that this was really about race more than anything else. But the sales agents wanted us out of there because they wanted to sell homes. And we wanted them to use whatever good offers that they had to get Levitt to change his decision. And of course, that was not to be.
We picketed every Saturday and every Sunday for 3 months on the weekend at the sales office. It doesn't look like we're making any headway, but so by the end of the summer, we decided to escalate our tactics. And that's when we went in the model home, and there were about a dozen of us, and wouldn't leave. And they didn't want to arrest us, so we spent the night. And so they did arrest us the next day, and the NAACP bailed us out. We went to trial. Fred Weissel was our attorney. He was an ACLU lawyer, and he took our case and argued masterfully, but the all-white jury found us guilty anyway of trespassing and fined us each $500, and the NAACP paid our fine. So they paid over $5,000 in fines. As a result of that arrest, it made news because we were protesting the fact that Levitt was getting government money, Federal Housing Authority money, and still discriminating against the public. So the FHA loans to Levitt information appeared in an article in the Wall Street Journal at the time. It went all around the country because Levitt wasn't the only developer who was getting FHA loans and discriminating. So therefore, it was national news.
The integration issues.
His position was he will go with whatever the community wants. And it was Civil Rights Act hadn't passed.
It took a year for it to be completed, I guess.
No, we bought.
So as I said, that's just a part of a longer documentary about the whole Bowie development. So Tales of Bel Air at Bowie, and you can Google it real quick if you're interested in watching the entire documentary, and it still is available online for free through PBS for at least one more year. And so you can watch it to learn more about that community. But as you saw there, the civil rights story related to Bowie. Share my screen again. That's a part of our trail, talking about, these beautiful homes that are part of the Levitt development that are the construction begins in the late 50s. But of course, as you heard, African Americans are excluded from being able to buy homes, which leads to these protests. And the protests for integration are led by the Prince George's County chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. And then you see, of course, so there you see CORE on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side, those counter protesters that were mentioned. And so you have, over the course of several months in 1963, from the summer into the fall, concentrated campaign of protests demanding integration along Route 50. These protests did result in several dozen arrests. But it's not until the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that we do get integration at Bel Air at Bowie. Next, we have what used to be known as Cole Fieldhouse. And so now it's called the Jones Hill House after the first African Americans who played football and basketball, respectively, for the University of Maryland. But Cole Fieldhouse is the name that those of us who've been around for a while know that site as historically. And that also is the site of another important civil rights story that we're telling along this Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail. And it's a bit of a different story than the other ones that I've talked about because it's involving all people or individuals who are not Prince Georgians or residents of DC or residents of Maryland. So people coming from outside. And so I'm going to actually share another brief video. I think this one's just about 2 minutes.
Hands on, stand, respectfully looking at the floor as Kentucky has won the championship game for the first time in their history.
And so, as I was hinting at prior to showing the video, and as you clearly see through the video, how we see how this story of sports and from two teams that are from different parts of the country coming to Maryland, to Prince George's County to play in this championship game at Cole Fieldhouse, and kind of the ramifications afterwards that this has for sports and for integration. And so that we see in the year immediately following this 66 champion game, we see um, every every team in the conference in the Southern U.S. has at least one black player on their roster in that following year, where that was not the case. And so that just paves the way for greater integration and an eventual an explosion in terms of the numbers of African Americans that are recruited and included on these teams. And so you see on the right hand side two images of the actual Texas Western team that played, and then you see how it was covered on the cover of the March 1966 edition of Sports Illustrated. And you see there the Kentucky player is, of course, the legendary player turned coach Pat Riley. Bowie State University. So that's another important story that we're telling, and I think this is the last one that I will share with you all. And so Bowie State, just a little background on this HBCU, the only HBCU located in Prince George's County. So it originally opens in Baltimore in 1864, and then it relocates to Bowie in 1911. And it was primarily a teacher's college for its first 98 years, but then it added a liberal arts curriculum in 1963, and it went from being called Maryland Teachers College to Bowie State College. And so in 1968, after kind of a buildup of years of unrest, it kind of comes to a head as African American students really become restless with the inadequate conditions that they see there at the school. And so here you see on the left-hand side an image from a student newspaper during that era, and you see this person is kneeling for their bed, saying their prayers, and there are these rats around, and they're saying, "And please God, don't let the rats come in and bite me tonight." And so that was just speaking to some of the issues that they were seeing with rodent infestations, as poor living conditions, the poor quality of their buildings. And so students, began to demand that. They demanded better living conditions. They demanded tenure for respected professors. They demanded changes at the registrar office. And so this all leads to, in March of 1968, student activists organized sit-ins, and it eventually leads to shutting down the entire campus for about 2 weeks. And then in that following month, students travel to the State House in Annapolis, where they take their grievances directly to the doorstep of the governor. And the governor at that time was Spiro Agnew. And so the governor refuses to acquiesce to these student demands, and over 270 students from Bowie are arrested and jailed. And we see in this story, we don't see kind of in some of the, like we saw in some of the other stories, it's not necessarily an immediate outcome that matches what the protesters were fighting for. But this is an ongoing issue that comes up again and again in the years and decades after 1968. And we do see finally in 2021, where the state of Maryland reached a $577 million settlement in a federal lawsuit that was brought by all of the states for HBCUs, so Morgan, Coppin, and Bowie, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So we see how this was a long battle, but we see how there has been a turning point in 2021 with that decision in that federal lawsuit. And so to learn more about the Civil Rights Trail, see the signs that are up, the stories that we currently tell. And like I said, this is something we'll be adding to, so there'll be more and more added to it as we move along and as we get more funding. But you can go to the website www.pgccivilrights.org. But overall, from today's presentation, let me stop sharing so I can see you all, is that hopefully as we talked about the Civil Rights Trail sites, or some of those sites, and thinking about what does that mean as it relates to a long civil rights movement. And I had a great conversation about this last night as well. Is, thinking about how we periodize the struggle for civil rights. I think it's very important. And so often when we think about civil rights, we think about certain people, and of course, Dr. King comes to mind and other people like that. And we're focused on a certain time period, 1950s, 1960s. But it's important to realize that the work that happens, the achievements that happen in the 50s and 60s, they're built upon work that came before. And that when we get this landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 64 or the Fair Housing in 68, that doesn't mean that automatically everything is better. That there's still activism that's continuing in the decades after and to the present day to deal with issues like police brutality, dealing with fair housing, dealing with labor rights, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to think about all of this as part of a larger and longer movement, and looking at how people are building upon the foundation of what has come before, how they're learning from those things that had come before, and so how it's part of a longer, more important movement. The importance of looking at the local level, that a lot can be lost when we look at just kind of this high level. What is the federal government doing? What is the president and what are the Congress doing? But also realizing what happens in localities matters, and it's important. I think one thing that's, kind of unique and special, I guess, in the history of Prince George's County is by looking at the civil rights activism that takes place in the county, we're able to see kind of the importance and the strength of strong urban Black communities in driving change during in civil rights activism. And for Prince George's County, that was especially unique and special because Prince George's County was situated between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And we see opportunities where African American leaders in both of those cities come in and help advance a civil rights agenda in the county. And so, I think those are just some of them. We could go on. I could name some more things, but I think those are just some of the important lessons to learn as we talk about this civil rights rich history in Prince George's County, and as we attempt to kind of elevate that story, but also incorporate it into a larger discussion of not only thinking about the past, but thinking about today and what change we still want to see and need to see in our present day county and our present day state. And so with that, I will stop, and I guess we can go to any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dr. Doster. That was really very interesting. Fun to look at things that I've passed over and not noticed on travels in the county. So I made notes. Carter, for some reason, I can't find the chat on my screen. So are there questions in the chat? If not, we will just raise your hand and we can do it that way.
I see one. I see a question about Hyattsville sites now or to come. So research is ongoing for the trail. I do know a few years back there was some research done about a theater in Hyattsville that had a possible civil rights story connected to it, but that's more research that needs to be done to flesh out that story, to figure out what would be said as a part of the civil rights trail. So yeah, so there are more to come, and how many more of those are in Hyattsville, we shall see. And we, like I said, we have identified others in other parts of the county, and the ones that I've talked about are ones that are not already on the website. There are some already on the website. You can see stuff from down in Upper Marlboro. You can see Laurel, north of Brentwood. So those places that already have signage are there.
Dr. Doster, excuse me, I see your hand up. I just wanted, when you mentioned North Brentwood, did North Brentwood and Lakeland and all the successful Black communities along the Route 1 corridor, were they in sync with each other and they worked together, or were they fairly isolated back in the turn of the 19th and 20th century?
Well, I think those communities were all, so it's important to think about when they were started and what the county as a whole looked like. So during that time, the black community countywide was very, very small in comparison definitely to what we have today. And so generally what you'll find is that these people were connected in one way or the other, even all the way down to like Upper Marlboro. The people were connected, they knew each other. If they were in, if they were part of the Episcopal Methodist church circuit, then they were, meeting each other that way. And so that there were connections between people in North Brentwood, the people we've had programs for people at one of our sites in the Merkirk area in Beltsville, where they've talked about growing up and how they would go down to North Brentwood and they would go over to Lakeland and one of my favorite people, Mr. Doc, who's former mayor of North Brentwood. He's the perfect person that you can talk to, who just knows everybody all over the county. Even though he grew up in North Brentwood, he can tell you about, oh yeah, I know so and so down in Aquasco and Brandywine, and so all of that to say that these people are very much connected because it was a much smaller community overall
Yeah.
community at the time.
Thank you. Aurelis, do you have a question?
Yes, Dr. Doster, wonderful presentation and excellent program. I just would like to know if there is a specific presentation as it relates to the city of College Park, but more specifically for the Lakeland community.
There's a lot of work being done, of course, on Lakeland, and so the experts are, of course, the people that are a part of the Lakeland Heritage. I'm messing up the name right now. The Lakeland Heritage Project. So Maxine Gross and Miss Violetta Sharp. So we did my office. So this is prior to my time. My office partnered with them and did a Black History Month exhibit solely on Lakeland, probably 12 to 15 years ago. And so actually that guide from that exhibition, I think, is still available online. But yeah, so there is continual work being done on Lakeland, and those people in that organization do a lot of talking and presentations specifically about Lakeland. I have the honor to just recently join the 1856 Project Advisory Board at the University of Maryland, which is really looking at the connection of the university to enslavement, but also the legacies of enslavement. So not just was slave labor used at the university at any time, or were the founders enslavers, but like, what is the legacies of enslavement and racism, and how does that affect, what happens later at the school? And so there's some really interesting research being done on the Dory family, who were residents of Lakeland, and how they worked at the university in the early 1900s. And so they were working there. They weren't allowed to go to school there, but looking at, how African Americans are excluded from the school, kind of thinking about what's the legacy of that exclusion, and what did labor look like in the school in different ways after enslavement. So all of that to say, yes, that research is going on. There are presentations and there are groups that are doing that, particularly the Lakeland Heritage organization.
Did find my chat. So do you have, the next question is, do you happen to recall, was the WBA Railroad the same one that the Calvert family had invested in?
Well, the WBNA, there might have been some earlier railroad, but in terms of the WBNA Electric Railroad, which is in the early 1900s, that is not in any way connected to the Calvert family. Now, there might be something earlier that they're connected to, but I'm not sure about that. And then I see a question about, did the University of Maryland play any role beyond hosting a basketball game? There are still at least 2 buildings on campus named for segregationists. And maybe if you could explain a little bit, play any role in basketball history, you mean, beyond hosting the game, or?
David, can you amplify that?
I unmute? Am I
Now-
unmuted?
Yeah, now you're muted. Yeah.
Okay. No, I was interested in general on what role the university has played in the whole civil rights movement. I remember that there were sit-ins on campus, there were sit-ins on Route 1. We're still trying at the university to come to grips with our history. It's only in the last few years that we have started recognizing, for example, our African-American graduates. We've just named a dorm after the first woman to graduate from the University of Maryland. And the only thing in this presentation is a basketball game that happened to be in what was then Coles Field House that didn't involve the university, really.
Yeah, no, like I said, I picked 5 sites to talk about.
Right.
So there's many more to include that we know about and some that we don't know about. I think to your point, some of the work already exists in the form of there on the campus. There's a African American history tour that was developed by Dean Kim Nickerson of years back, which kind of highlights some of that history. But that also is just a start. And so I think also that the 1856 project, which I was talking about, is also kind of picking up that mantle to hopefully in the future do that. I think right now they're a little focused on a much earlier period, but hopefully they will get to, being able to talk about, the history of President Byrd and kind of as a vehement racist and what effect that had and talking about the stories of at that time the university was part of a system that included College Park and Baltimore as well, and so the president was over the nursing school in Baltimore. And so when you have the case where Esther McCready, a Black nurse, applies to go to the nursing school, the case is against Byrd because he's over all of that school system.
Right.
And that's an important story. That's a University of Maryland story, though not a Prince George's County specific story. That's a part of that narrative. I think there's some information on campus about a little bit more now maybe than before about Juanita Jackson Mitchell, but one of our other buildings is named after, of course, her husband, right? And so so there's more to be kind of fleshed out. I think that 1856 project is probably going to do some of that heavy lifting because that is kind of I guess a priority of the new president, who he is put some funding behind this effort, and you have the chief of diversity and equity involved in this, and so so I think there is more to come. I think for us, we didn't focus too much on this the school, University of Maryland, in our project because we're an outside organization. We're not part of the university. And so you would think it would be easy for us to get a sign up on the campus, but that's not the case. It's easier for us to get signs up at these other places and tell these other stories. And then also being truthful, like if I have to choose between telling stories of University of Maryland and Bowie State, I'm going to focus on Bowie State, the HBCU that's historically not supported, not funded. University of Maryland has plenty of resources to jump on this project and provide their own resources to tell those stories.
Good point. Thank you.
No, thank you.
I don't see any in the chat. Any other questions? Carter has noted previous Carter conversations that we have done that I'd refer you to. Last year we had folks from Lakeland talking about Lakeland, and then the North Brentwood, and I can't remember if it was the gentleman you identified, Dr. Doster, but North Brentwood was the year before that. So please feel free to copy those. And and there's a link to the University of Maryland Black History Tour and the 1856 project. Carter, you are on it.
If I could ask a question, Dr. Doster, what's sort of the projected future timeline with the Civil Rights Trail in Prince George's? Are you hoping to be able to add 5 signs a year or 5 points a year, or is it something that has a I guess it all depends on funding and things, but
Yeah, I think unfortunately it does depend on funding, and it's not a clear timeline. So it began pre-COVID, and our kind of how we worked pre-COVID and actually who was involved pre-COVID was very different. And so, like I said, some of those organizations that were involved beforehand include the Laurel Museum. The director who was involved, she's now gone. Involved ATHA, Aaron Markovich was there. He's now gone. But of course, Megan is doing a great job, so I'm not worried about that. But so it's a lot of different players and kind of getting body up to speed. The Prince George's County History Consortium has not met as a body since 2019. My office, is down to from an office of, 2.5 people basically, which is not great in the first place, down to an office of one person right now. So there's a lot about resources, which includes funding, but also includes other things that will help us really kind of ramp this up and do more. But it's kind of a TBD at the moment.
and then thinking about how the whole Washington area is kind of, the boundaries are a little fluid in some cases. Are there comparable civil rights trails in some of these surrounding jurisdictions? I know in the district there are a few, but did Montgomery County or other areas around us have similar efforts going on?
No, they do not. So, I mean, that was, and like for us, this project applying to the National Park Service, having this idea, this was unique for Maryland as well. And so, we're hopefully we'll maybe start something that other people latch onto. I think are there are kind of similar narratives presented maybe in similar kind of ways in other jurisdictions, but they're presented as part of a larger African American history tour. Whereas here we're trying to break out, this is not just the African American history tour, we're specifically looking at civil rights. And so that was something, a fight that I had been waging kind of early on in this project and continued to wage, is that, if we're saying that this is a civil rights tour that we're developing, we don't necessarily need to have a marker that talks about the founding of Glen Ardent. Don't tell people in Glen Ardent I said that. But, unless we're talking specifically about what civil rights activism they were doing. And so, making clear the separations. And of course, all of these things are connected in that, the people in the churches and the communities are doing these things. But we want to be very focused and specific on these are civil rights stories that we're telling, and realizing, as we saw in the story of Bel Air at Bowie, that, it's not just African Americans that are waging the battle against civil rights, that we do have interracial cooperation, which is very important to the story.
Anybody else?
I just want to say something about our particular neighborhood. Mary Ann knows about this. We have the most diverse streets you can imagine. We're in a cul-de-sac. We have as many whites as blacks. We have white, black, Asian, we just a mix, and we get along great. We have the greatest parties together. You have to come join us sometime when we have one on our street.
I'll be looking for the invite.
Keep Thursday nights open. I don't know if that's just girl night, but you'd be welcome, I'm sure.
Maybe you'll come to our St. Patrick's Day party on that street.
Okay.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so very much. Good luck with the rest of the month. And I suppose you've already started planning for Black History Month for next year. This has got to be an incredible project for you. But it's certainly wonderful to see all of the things around the county and to follow up on them. So thank you so much for doing what you do there and at the university, and certainly for this lecture. It was really great. I just want to remind people that next month, the next Carter conversation is March 23rd, and John Mather will be our speaker. He's a Nobel Prize winner in our midst, and he's going to be talking about the Webb telescope. So I hope you will join us on March 23rd. Dr. Doster, we welcome you back. We'll see what's out there in the galaxy.
Can I ask Dr. Doster a quick question? I'm late, but I have one question. Hi, Dennis. Sundown towns, I've heard that some of these little towns we're talking about, cities, whatever we are, including Hyattsville, operated like sundown towns, whether they were clearly designated that or not. And I'm just curious if that has begun to surface in your work, let alone, I have no clue about the history of, was there any movement to get that erased? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Actually, like that, I had a chance to, like I said, last night I was with the Eleanor Roosevelt Democratic Club in Greenbelt, giving a presentation about housing, and that kind of came up in part of the presentation. I talked briefly about, the Wyndham Road barrier between Brentwood and North Brentwood, which was and I think there's like an art project there now, or mural or something that kind of commemorates that history of that dividing line between the two communities. And that, like as you said, that Brentwood operated, as a sundown town, that African Americans weren't allowed to cross that line after sundown. And so that there is that history. I also had a program prior to COVID. That's my dividing line. I can't think of years. It's pre-COVID and after COVID, but prior to COVID, with Reverend Perry Smith, the late Reverend Perry Smith at out of First Baptist Church in North Brentwood. And so he had a rich history. And I think if you Google him online, there's a interview with him on YouTube. But he has a rich history of civil rights activism, president of the NAACP in the county, knew and worked with Dr. King, so very rich history. And in that program, what we did with him, he talked about kind of, traveling, having to go from College Park through University Park, being mindful of what time of day it was, being pulled over by police. And so, yeah, that history is out there, and it has been told in certain places and in certain ways.
Thank you.
What was the Reverend's name again, Dr. Doster?
Perry Smith, P-E-R.
Okay, thank you.
And Betty, thanks for joining us, even though it was late. You were, we appreciated what you all offered last year from the Lakeland community. So I'm glad you're here, and this will be recorded. So Carter will send that out in a couple of days, and you can get in on the beginning of this. Okay, well, everybody have a nice rest of your weekend, and thank you again, Dr. Doster. It was a privilege.
Thank you all for having me, and hope to come back sometime.
Great.
Thank you.